What's up, YouTube? It's another episode of your friendly neighborhood comic book dude, specifically our comic chats, where we look at some classic comics here, maybe drum up some nostalgia for you on the comic front, maybe catch your eye on something you've been looking for to add to your collection. Who knows? This week we've got a lot of, I don't really know how best to put it. I want to call them one-shots, but a good chunk of what we got today was, starting in the 70s, Marvel did a bunch of giant-sized comics. So essentially what they were, if you imagine your average comic size was 20 pages, 25 pages, giant sizes were like 50-page stories for, well-known characters, or in some cases not so well-known characters that they were trying to kind of drum up interest for. To my knowledge, none of the giant sizes preceded their actual, issues. So, for example, we've got Giant Size Avengers, number 1. Actually, 1 through 5. None of the, Giant Size Avengers came out after Avengers had already been an established team, comic, that sort of thing. They were sort of, I almost want to call them, they were almost like the precursor to annuals. They were like, hey, you're already buying this title. Why not get some more? You're not getting enough of this every month. We want to give you more. So a lot of these were 4 or 5 issue. I don't even know. Again, they weren't really miniseries, but they followed a sequential numbering. But a lot of them were one and done stories. Like the story that would be in issue 1 wouldn't necessarily coincide with what's in issue 2, for example. And look at that, actually. I said 50-page, 68 big pages. So, there were some ads in those, but story-wise, I think you could say at the minimum they were 50-page stories. Some noteworthy stuff in the Giant Size Avengers. We had 1 through 5 this week. This actual first issue had a couple of things going on. So, I don't know if you can notice, there's a couple of people here that we might be familiar from last week. We've got Namor, Human Torch, that sort of thing. So we get the Invaders in this issue. It's actually the Invaders' second appearance, but it's also got some older superheroes, at least relative to this. They've got first modern appearance of Miss America and first modern appearance of the Wizard, who they were part of, I want to say their name was the 6 American Heroes. I'll be honest, my first exposure to them, which, most people, don't, hear about these characters because they didn't, keep being in the public consciousness. Every once in a while Marvel will bring them back up, but they don't stand the test of time the way Cap did, Iron Man, that sort of thing. But there was, for any of you that are familiar, there was a cartoon in the 90s. It was a Spider-Man animated series that was done by Stan Lee and Avi Arad, and the last season of it had a 6-episode, I don't know what you want to call it, a 6-episode story that was all about the 6 American heroes that had the Wizard, Miss America, was it the Black Marvel? I think who else was there? The Thunderer, Cap, and the Destroyer. Yeah. 6 American heroes. So they were a team with Captain America before Cap had done stuff with the Avengers, and I even believe the Invaders. So feel free to fact check me on that. I didn't go super hard into looking on those. But so again, that issue was first modern Miss America, first modern Wizard, and second Invaders. What else? Issue 2 is the origin of an Avengers character named Rama-Tet. So that's his OG telling of his story. What else? Issue 4 of Giant Size Avengers, if you can see on there, was the wedding of Vision and Scarlet Witch, which was a thing for a long time, and now it's not. And I think Vision's single again. He made his own family for a little while. And made his own wife and kids, but other than that, that was a big seminal thing for a long time. Scarlet Witch and Vision were married. So that's 1 through 5 of Avengers. Then we've got Giant Size Defenders, 1 through 4. So the Defenders, which we haven't gotten too into yet. I think we've got actual Defenders comics to go through eventually. I haven't got my hands on them yet, but so the Defenders were another team. I'm not 100% on their origins. I think when we get around to doing the actual Defenders, I'll read up some. But it was can't even call them. They're not like a cosmic team. They're not a mystical team. They kind of like touched a little bit of everything in the Marvel universe because we've got Silver Surfer, who was a Galactus Herald. Although actually he wasn't even a normal member. Actually, forget him. I think he's just popping in here for this story. Doc Strange, Hulk, Submariner, Valkyrie were the original Defenders. So, I mean, obviously they all come from places where they were already established characters. Hulk was an Avenger, Submariner was an Invader. Doctor Strange wasn't really team aligned at the time, and Valkyrie was sort of like Thor mythos, Journey into Mystery, type character. But yeah, again, because the Defenders already had a book. These were like extra stories to get going on. Cool thing about the Defenders giant sizes, there were a couple of noteworthy things in these. We actually had in the third giant size Defenders here was the first appearance of Korvac, which plays into a big Avengers story, Korvac saga. And then we've also got the third appearance in Giant Size Defenders number 5, third appearance of the Guardians of the Galaxy, which you can even see some of them down there. There's like Yondu's knocked out, a couple other ones there. And for any of you guys that aren't familiar, the original Defenders, the original Guardians of the Galaxy didn't actually consist of the characters that we saw in the first movie. They actually more consisted of the characters that you saw in the second movie. Most of the original Defenders were really the Ravagers, essentially. But the way it kind of seems like they're doing them in the MCU is the Ravagers, did things together before the Guardians of the Galaxy, but they didn't use that name. So, grades. I haven't really been mentioning the grades just now. So for those Giant Size Avengers, I think the lowest grade we had on those was a 7.5, 7.5, and the highest one we had was the Vision Scarlet Witch issue was a 9.0, and then on these Defenders, similar stuff. The lowest we had was 7.5. The highest one, the number 1 was actually pretty nice. That was a 9.2. So, what else we've got? Again, we haven't gone into the full-blown issues on these just yet, but we've got... Because I know we showcased one of the issues of Tomb of Dracula. It was a Blade issue. We are going to end up having more like the rest of the series. I hate breaking up runs, but sometimes in the comic business, you sort of recognize that when you have one issue that's like a $500,000 issue and all the issues around it are $20, $30, and in all likelihood you're trying to sell them as a set, and somebody's going to lowball you because they really only want that key. It's better to sell the key and break up the other stuff and sell those to the people that need those. But I showcased Tomb of Dracula number 10 in I think the first comic video. So we've got they did Giant Size Dracula, which it's the same Dracula from the Tomb of Draculas. The first issue of that actually wasn't even called Giant Size Dracula. It was called Giant Size Chillers, featuring Dracula. But they continued those on. They did Giant Size Dracula 2 through 5, and when you do your, when you look it up in the price guide and stuff on this, it actually denotes that the 2 through 5 are picking up from the Giant Size Chiller number 1. Interestingly, the Giant Size Chillers did continue as well without Dracula, so it was like there was a Giant Size Dracula number 2 and a Giant Size Chillers number 2, but they weren't related. In the Dracula stuff, the things of note here, what did we have? So in Giant Size Dracula number 1, you can actually see her mentioned on the cover. It's got his daughter Lilith. And this is actually her first appearance in Marvel. So there's that, first Lilith. It's about an 8.0. Then we've got another sort of a big deal, I guess, for anybody out there who's sort of a collector of not necessarily first appearances, but maybe first works, of writers or artists that they're fans of. Giant Size Dracula number 5 is actually the first John Byrne art. John Byrne is probably one of the most well-known Marvel artists, if not comic artists, period. He did lots of things. Fantastic Four comes to mind first, but he's touched a lot of things in Marvel. So Giant Size Dracula number 5 is actually his first Marvel artwork that he's ever done. So if you're a fan of John Byrne, you know are the type of person that maybe doesn't shoot for first appearances, but are like, oh man, I like John Byrne, I like Frank Miller, I like whoever. I want their origins. That would be that from Marvel from him. Let's see. What do we got next? Okay, next here is another one of these. They gave it one name for the first Giant Size, but then changed it subsequently. So this was Giant Size Superstars number 1. Beautiful Thing versus Hulk cover. People always go nuts for those things because it's just like those two are sort of like in a never-ending fight, and they're not even like enemies in the strictest sense. It's more just like who's stronger. Their pride is too much to let the fight ever truly end to know. So, but this was really what like we would consider Giant Size Fantastic Four number 1. It was called Giant Size Superstars, but again, subsequent issues carried the numbering. We had Giant Size Fantastic Four 2, 3, 4. I believe they only did 4 of the Fantastic Four ones. Grades on those were between 8.0 and 9.0. Very interesting one on this though. They have the first appearance of a relatively well-known, I feel like, in this day and age, mutant, related to X-Men, more specifically X-Factor. Giant Size Fantastic Four, number 4, is the first appearance of Jamie Madrox, or the Multiple Man. I was super shocked when I was looking at this, because I saw that on the cover, and I'm like, wait, really? First Madrox was in a Fantastic Four. And I guess it's not too odd when you think about the fact that first appearances aren't always related to, where they appear. Because, back in the day, they didn't know that the character who's appearing there was actually going to, go into a million other things. I wouldn't be shocked if it was almost even a retcon. Like, they introduced him as somebody with the power to multiply, and then they eventually said, by the way, this power is derived from the fact that he's a mutant. But yeah, I thought that was cool. And if you're a fan of X-Men, or if even you're, a speculator, I have seen and heard things in the past where they said that they wanted to do more with Jimmy Madrox and the X-Factors. I don't know if that would really be something that would play into Disney's plans with the X-Men characters. I do believe he has appeared on screen in one of the X-Men movies. I think it was maybe X2, when the school gets like attacked, because you kind of like see all the random like younger mutants, but like the power sets that you see are similar, and something in my memory tells me that we saw a multiple kid, probably not Multiple Man, but unnamed, I'm sure. So next, we do only have one of these. In fact, I think this was one of the ones where they only did one. This was a Giant Size Invaders. Kind of a cool like cover of like them running across the globe to fight the Nazis. I'm not sure if this was before or after their popularity had really like sunk in. If that was the only reason they wanted to do a single issue on this, just some nice 68-page Giant Size Invader action. Nothing of particular note. This one was an 8.5, so that's something. Next thing, we have Giant Size Man-Thing. Please feel free to get the laughter out there. I mean, I even giggle about this sometimes, me and my colleagues, when we bring it up. There's giggity moments when it comes to having a giant-sized Man-Thing. He's... And I'm sure I'll get reamed for this one. He's the DC equivalent, or he's the Marvel equivalent of DC's Swamp Thing, or Swamp Thing is DC's equivalent of Marvel's Man-Thing. I'm pretty sure Swamp Thing came first. And I mean, they don't do the exact same thing, but the more the characters have been fleshed out over the years, the more their powers and abilities and standings in their respective universes are similar. There was 5 of these, and I think the low was 7.0 on one of them, and the high was 9.0. So, typical range for most of these books. There weren't any like huge standouts in these. There's a Howard the Duck backup story in Giant Size Man Thing number 5, and for some weird reason, Howard the Duck and Man Thing are just sort of like oddly intertwined. I want to say most of the early Howard the Duck appearances come from issues of Man Thing, so I don't know. I think maybe at the time this was something where they were like, oh hey, that Howard the Duck character, let's throw him into this Giant Size. People are loving him, right? Right. So there was those. There's another one of these, and my sense is because it was Man Thing related, this is why this was in my friend's collection here. This was Giant Size Spider-Man number 5, but it's if you read the title, it's Giant Size Spider-Man and Man Thing number 5. Numbering wise, this is really just Giant Size Spider-Man number 5. Still a cool book. It's an 8.5. It's about a $30 book. It's pretty cool. Not something you would expect to see in a normal team up of sorts, but yeah. What else do we have? Some more of these, like spotlight a horror character in some side stuff while we give them their own book thing. We had some Giant Size Werewolf by Nights. It's 1 through 5 on those. 7.0 to 9.0 on these. We did have one noteworthy issue, and she's actually on the cover of this one. Issue 1 of the Giant Size Werewolf by Night has Tigra, who ends up becoming like an Avenger at one point. She's just sort of like a werecat instead of a werewolf. But yeah, first appearance of Tigra in that. This next one, I will admit, is a little bit before my time. I mean, granted, a lot of this stuff is, but there are things like this that some of these things that I'm into. For example, I'm a huge fan of George Romero and Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, those things. 60s and up zombie stuff, but not everything from olden times, so to speak. This next thing was an adaptation of a film from 1976 called Logan's Run. So Logan's Run was, I don't know if I can really call it dystopian. It was more like, it was a sci-fi film, and it was set in the 23rd century, and, a lot of advanced technology, a lot of, people at the time most likely imagining, how the world could go. The star was Michael York, who has been in tons of things over the years. I know him from Three Musketeers, Four Musketeers. Other people might know him as Basil from Austin Powers. He's had lots of work over the years, though. So they had a Logan's Run miniseries, and it ran 1 to 7. So the first 5 issues of Logan's Run adapted the movie story, and issues 6 and 7 sort of expanded on that. So, but not only that, issue 6 by a lot of people in comic community is known as, and I mean, he's not denoted on the cover or anything. It's more just something you'll find as you're reading the story. But Logan's Run number 6 is known as the first solo story for Thanos. Lovely enemy of the Avengers, star of Avengers Endgame, Infinity War, background appearance in some other Marvel movies. But, his first appearance had been in an issue of Iron Man, but this is sort of his first solo outing in Logan's Run. So that issue is ticked up a little higher relative to the other issues in the run. Most of this was in really nice shape. I think this was all 8.5s or higher. And when I say that, it was really more like one issue was 8.5, 1 or 2 issues were 8.5. The rest were all like 9.0s, 9.2s. So very, very nice collection there. The last 2 things, I know predominantly been getting a lot of Marvel, so I've been trying to dig out some more DC too to sort of offset it a little bit. So the next thing, which actually there's 41 issues of, and I'll show you a couple of cool covers on them, just because, I can keep you here all day if I'm showing you 41 different issues. But the next character we are looking at is from DC, and his name is the Phantom Stranger. Phantom Stranger. Beautiful, beautiful copies here. 12 centers, and slowly eked up from there. The Phantom Stranger, he actually, I won't lie, I actually thought this was the first issue of the first Phantom Stranger ever. It's not. It's close. This is actually considered Volume 2 of Phantom Stranger. There was a Phantom Stranger miniseries that preceded this. That was his real first appearance in issue 1 of that. But this is, you could call it his first ongoing story. It ran 41 issues. It started in 1969, so the miniseries didn't precede it by much. Let's see here. So this the character himself was created by John Broome. If you've ever seen him in anything, he man, it's kind of hard to explain. He's sort of like a cosmic level entity for DC, but he's not really malicious. He's more just in the shadows, kind of trying to help people move things around in a helpful way is the best way I can put it. He's immortal. He can teleport. He's got every useful power that he could possibly need. There's no true origin for Phantom Stranger. Some of the newer comics have tried to, when they did reboots, have tried to sort of make the origin of him sort of biblical. And turn, the New 52 stuff regarding that was sort of, I don't know if it's been set aside, but it's probably not getting referenced much either. They kind of tried to inexorably tie him to Pandora and the Question and make them like a trinity of characters that are cosmic powers. I think the stories that are more popular of the Phantom Stranger with other cosmic characters are going to be things more like related to him and the Spectre. For anybody who's not familiar with the Spectre, he was one of the key players in the Crisis on Infinite Earths CW crossover that just happened a couple of months ago here. Same sort of power set, just like a god level universal entity who's just sort of there, not really doing too much in a negative way, but I would be shocked if they were taking direction from anybody. Most of the Phantom Stranger stories, though, like I said, kind of dealt with him just doing stuff in the background. Oh shit, this is happening. Nobody else is going to help me. Maybe I should intervene. I think the lowest possible grade on any of those issues, there was one that was a 6.5, but the vast majority are like 8.0 and higher. Couple of cool, you see a couple of cool covers on the, a lot of these are cool covers. This one, Spectre of the Stalking Swamp. That, to me, looks like the freaking Swamp Thing, but everywhere I've looked does not acknowledge that is a Swamp Thing appearance. So, maybe it is, maybe it didn't. What else? There were... A lot of these issues had backup stories, too. Sort of like this one says, beginning in this issue, Frankenstein. So they would kind of tell other creepy stories in them, not unlike the Marvel counterparts, Man-Thing that's got Howard the Duck in the background, although I don't know how creepy that would be considered. Another one, Black Orchid, another known horror DC character. A lot of these characters got given spotlights when DC had a lot of their Vertigo comics, which were their more adult, less superhero-y imprints. Oh, here's a cool one. Deadman. An actual DC character named Deadman. The last 3 issues of this Phantom Stranger, around 39, 40, and 41, all feature Deadman story. Although that's not it. That one was 33. But Deadman's another macabre DC character named Boston Brand. So what do we got here? Yeah, so here they are. Issue 39, co-starring Deadman. 40 and 41. So, cool stuff if you're a fan of Deadman or Phantom Stranger, either or. Oh, cool. So, the last thing, and, at first I wasn't sure that I'd save the best for last, but when I delved more into it, I kind of was like, you know what, this really is a nice thing. So, a big name in both Marvel and DC, probably more associated to Marvel, but his DC stuff is, the work that he did for DC is less, so it's more prominent when you think of him from them. But Jack Kirby, for you comic buffs out there, did an array of titles related to a concept he came up with for DC called the Fourth World. Best way to describe it was just like very super advanced, like aliens far off in space, not really touching our other DC characters, but would eventually become major players in their worlds. They were split up into two worlds. One was New Genesis, one was Apocalypse. Apocalypse was the bad world. New Genesis was the good world. The worlds were ruled over by two brothers. Darkseid had Apocalypse. Highfather had New Genesis. They've done tons of stories from him, but Jack Kirby came up with all these guys. And their new the name of the characters that were on Highfather's Earth. To be honest, the blanket name kind of rolls across a lot of these characters are the New Gods. So the character that we got today, who was made by Jack Kirby as part of his New God initiative, was Mr. Miracle. Look at that, Mr. Miracle #1. It's beautiful. This was, in fact, his first appearance. Titular title, first appearance as well. His alter ego is Scott Free. His big thing as Mr. Miracle is he's an escape artist, set to be able to escape anything. He's got other powers too, as most of the New Gods do. Immortal. He's got some other tricks up his sleeve. His backstory was that as a way to create a treaty between Apocalypse and New Genesis, they agreed that Highfather and Darkseid would swap kids and, raise them, and it was just sort of like a pact to be like, this is our way of making peace by being able to raise each other's children, I guess. So Scott Free was really Highfather's son, and he got given to Darkseid. And Darkseid gave up his son, Orion. And I think part of the rationale was Orion would, because he's from Apocalypse, would grow up to be evil and sort of destroy New Genesis from the inside. It didn't work. The New Gods raised him right, and he became one of Darkseid's greatest enemies. He despised what his father stood for and did not want it to continue to stand. So the other thought was, okay, well, I've got Highfather's son. I can raise him to be evil and use him as a tool against Highfather. That also didn't work out in Darkseid's favor. Scott Free, despite all the torture and everything he was put through on Apocalypse, never quite submitted. He eventually escaped, came to Earth, and, became a hero. Not as prominent as some of the heroes we know from DC, but, he was always been sort of aligned on the side of good. His wife actually ended up being part of the Justice League, over the years as well. So we got issues 1 to 24 of Mr. Miracle. It was a 25-issue run, and it had a special. I haven't seen the 25th issue yet in the collection. It may yet show itself. We'll most likely still be selling the collection without it, because what I can tell you is the later issues in this run were not that valuable monetarily. I think even in their greatest grades, they were $8 or $10 books. So if you happen to pick up this collection and the only issue you don't have is issue 25, it's not going to break your bank to finish that collection. So yeah, issue 1 was his first appearance. There was a handful of first appearances in this Mr. Miracle run as related to, again, Darkseid, Apocalypse, the New Gods, that sort of thing. Issue 2 was the first appearance of Granny Goodness. So Granny Goodness, if you imagine that Darkseid was, I don't know, owned a horse stable, Granny Goodness was the horse trainer. She trained all of Darkseid's, best human, or not human, but best living weapons. And she tried her best to torture scot-free into becoming a great weapon. Didn't quite work out in her favor. Issue 4 is also another first appearance in this lovely run, is Big Barda. So the accomplishment of Granny Goodness's that is most well known is she created a female team of Furies. They were called the Female Furies, and they, basically were at her bidding, a la Darkseid, for Darkseid. So Big Barda ended up defecting, and she eventually becomes Scot-Free's wife. When he runs to Earth, he takes her with him. So it's her first appearance. Then something interesting here. So we got issues 5, 6, 7, and 8. So issues 5 through 8 are all oversized issues. Now, in them there aren't any specific special appearances, but they're all just supersized. 5 and 6, I believe, are 48 pages, and 7 and 8 are 52 pages. Still just normal issues, part of the run. But I think because they randomly upped the size during this period, I'm still having a hard time understanding why it increased the price so much. But those issues are the most expensive issues in this run. One of these is so expensive, it's 4 times the value of the first appearance of Mr. Miracle. Again, I've looked it up. I couldn't tell you why. I don't know if it was just the scarcity in putting out books of that size at that time. The fact that they only did it for 4 issues, I couldn't tell you. Issue 5 is an 8.0, issue 6 was an 8.5, 7 was a 7.5, and number 8 was really pretty. I'm calling it a 9.2. In a 9.2, number 8 is a $250 book. It blows my mind. I'm like, what? No first appearances, nothing of particular note. There may be more to that story, but from what I could find and just my own determination, I think it must have been the fact that issues of that size were just very, very uncommon at the time. The rest of the run is relatively inexpensive, though. Issue 9, if we're looking at solely on prices, issue 9 is a $20 book versus $250 for the issue previous to it. I don't know. This was another one, though, where most of the issues were, the lowest possible issue I had was a 6.5. The vast majority, again, are 8.0 or higher. What else do we got, though? There's some other noteworthy stuff. We got issue 15 was the actual origin of Mr. Miracle. So up until now, all the stuff that I told you, they may have been peppering in details throughout the run, but it becomes abundantly clear who he is and what he's gone through in this issue. It's also the first appearance of a character named Shiloh Norman, who goes on to play an important part of the New God stories, is really the best way I can put it. He's not, he's no Bruce Wayne, but he is worth mentioning. And then the last one that's of any note, and even then it's, not super beaucoup dollars here, is issue 18. So issue 18, despite the fact that, they ran away together, they hadn't actually gotten married yet. So Big Barda and Mr. Miracle finally decide in this issue they're going to tie the knot. And so that happens, as well as the fact that Darkseid makes a cameo. Combination of those things, other New Gods make appearances. That's Highfather right there. A slew of other, you got Granny Goodness there. You got some of the New Gods. There's Orion down there. So. But that's probably why that one's like a $25 book. And then after that, they legitimately trail off. Like got here, issue 19 and 20 are like $8, $4. But again, like I said, the conditions on the majority of that run were about 8.0 or higher. I think other than that, that's what we got for today, though. So if any of this stuff ends up being things that you're interested in, feel free to check the links in the description. As always, subscribe, follow, share. When we get up to 100 subscribers, assuming we're still not in Corona pandemic lockdown mode, I've said in the past I want to start doing some comic roundtables, get some people together, maybe talk like industry trends, news, things going on in the world. There's a lot of stuff happening with comics or not happening, if you think about it news-wise at the moment. And things will always be happening. So, maybe this will be a place that you'd want to get some information from. But as always, I've been your friendly neighborhood comic book dude, and I'll catch you guys next time.